Welcome to the Succession Stories podcast. I'm Laurie Barkman. I work with business owners to maximize value, create options for the future, and be happy in your next. I'm excited to share the What's Next series as part of Succession Stories. These conversations spotlight the theme of transitions. Changes can come at you unexpectedly or be planned. Are you ready? After all, in business and life, succession is about transitions, and how you embrace what's next matters. When you face your biggest ownership and leadership transition decisions, will you be ready? Most owners feel as if they are pushed out of their business, but the happiest exits occur when there are more factors pulling you towards your next. That's why I'm offering a way for you to evaluate your readiness on a personal level. Go to getmyprescore.com. Take our online survey. It just takes 8 minutes to complete, and you'll receive a custom report of your personal readiness to exit your business, including a summary of unseen factors that could lead to regret. In addition, you'll receive a free ebook, The Exit Checklist, a 5-step personal action plan for a happy and lucrative exit from your business. Your score means getting closer to your next chapter, whatever, wherever that may be. Visit getmyprescore.com. This week on Succession Stories, it was a special conversation I had with a friend of mine, Hal Riley. Hal was the team captain for the world's toughest race, Eco Challenge in Fiji, 2020. You might have seen it on Amazon Prime. Hal led a team of disabled veterans and civilians who competed against 65 other teams to go across 400 miles of dense jungles, steep mountains, winding rivers, oceans, and dangerous swamps. It was an incredible experience. And as Hal shared, his team had some extra challenges. We shine a new light on the term disabled is one of the things that Hal talks about, is really passionate about, and how you shouldn't pack your fears when you go into something that's so unknown. He looks for the moments to take the chance, even if you don't win. There's so many life lessons, business lessons, leadership lessons, and what Hal and I talked about. I really encourage you to listen to the whole episode. It is a little longer than normal, I will give you that. It's over an hour, but I guarantee you will listen and be inspired to Hal Riley. Hal Riley, it is amazing to see you. Thank you so much for coming on Succession Stories. This What's Next episode is going to be really special. And we're going to talk first about how we know each other. But first, let me welcome you. Thank you for coming on the show.
Absolutely. Thanks. I'm excited about this, Laurie. This will be fun.
It's going to be a lot of fun. So you and I reconnected recently, and I was thinking about the calendar, and by golly, we met 10 years ago. Can you believe it's been, or I should say we last really spoke 10 years ago.
Right.
We worked together because I was your client.
Right.
I was your client at a pretty big company here, and we worked together for probably almost 2 years.
Yep. And
as life goes with transitions, we had kind of lost track of each other. And social media, I think in its brightest days, in a wonderful example as us, is it kind of brought us back together even most recently. So I wanted to share with the audience a little bit about, I think, connectivity. And you might recognize this, or anyone watching on videos.
I love it.
It's going to recognize what I'm holding up. So I'll tell everyone what I'm holding. I'm holding a Russian nesting doll set of Jerome Bettis, who is a Hall of Famer, Pittsburgh Steeler running back. And Hal knew that, of course, I lived in Pittsburgh and that I'm a fan of the Steelers. And you, at the time, you were in Dallas. And how you had these Russian nesting dolls, I don't know, but you mailed them to me. Do you remember that?
Yeah, of course.
And so somehow these Russian nesting dolls, I'd look at them every once in a while. Again, this was like 10 years ago. And I'd think, oh, Hal Riley, I wonder what he's up to. And then what happened? In August of 2020, I happened to be looking at my Instagram, and I saw these amazing posts from you about this Eco Challenge race in the middle of who knows where in Fiji. And I was like, is this for real? And I started following you, and it was for real. And that's a big part of what I want to talk about today is your experience with that race. It was quite an amazing experience for you. And I also want to rewind on other aspects of your life. But I think, and you and I talked ahead of time, Big part of what I want to learn from you is your experiences with fear and how you learn to overcome fear, not only through your experience with the Eco Challenge, but also with other things in your life.
Sure. Yeah.
So I know that's a lot. That's a heavy lift right there. But we're going to dive into all of that.
Can we edit out the 10-year part because maybe that ages us or something?
It doesn't age us. I mean, come on, we're still in our 30s. So
right.
Yeah, we got started early in life. Yeah. So first question for you, Hal, is why don't you talk about your experience a little bit with Eco Challenge? What was it? What was the race? Just so if people didn't watch it on Amazon Prime, hopefully they did, but in case they didn't, just talk a little bit about the race. What was that for you?
Yeah. The Eco Challenge is Amazon Prime's, it's a series for the world's toughest race. And they were not lying when they named it that.
It was real.
Yeah. Eco Challenge, a few people may remember, was on Discovery Channel and a couple of other networks way back in the day. There was a 17-year gap between when we did the race and the last one, which was also in Fiji. So it was good to have the race come back. It was really fun to be a part of. I got to be the captain of Team Unbroken, which I'm really proud of and really excited about. On that race, team was 2 wounded combat veterans and 2 civilians, one being myself. And there are these long expedition length races, which I'll explain that in a moment. There are 4 race members and 1 support person. So our support person was a friend of mine who was also a civilian, and he was super stoked and excited to be on the team. Our team was kind of put together by my older sister, Gretchen, and Gretchen started the team really with this mission of having some wounded veterans and civilians working together. And that is a big challenge for just a lot of ordinary, regular veterans. When they come back home, their world is very different. They are now in a civilian world. The rules are different. And so that's a challenge that we wanted to highlight and be able to work together on this platform for the race and as a team. And then there was also the element of just disabilities on the team. Gretchen is deaf and has some traumatic brain injuries from being blown up in combat. Keith has several metal joints from also being blown up in his Humvee while he was serving in combat. Anne was also on the team. Anne is a civilian, but she works for the VA and has diabetes. And then I am a civilian, but I was in a boating accident years ago when I was younger and ruptured several discs in my back. So we all kind of brought a bit of challenge to the table. And yeah, it was really fun. Just briefly, adventure racing as a broad statement, for those that aren't familiar or haven't seen the show, adventure racing is essentially an off-road triathlon on steroids. The fundamental sport beneath the racing is orienteering, which means you have to navigate the entire course by map and compass. So you never have a course to look at. You're given a set of maps. You never look at, oh, here's the race course. So unlike a traditional triathlon where you can really hone in on microseconds or micro minutes to kind of work on your placement and perform better, adventure racing, man, you never know what the course is. You don't know what the disciplines are going to be. And most races are 8 to 24 hours, meaning there are a set of checkpoints that you have to find along this given section of these maps. And you have 8 or 24 hours to find as many of those checkpoints as possible. You get points and then you're scored on time. For the races that are really longer, either in time or in distance, there may be a 3-day race or a 5-day race, or in the case of Eco Challenge, it was an 11-day race. That's considered an expedition length race. And you have team members that support you along the way and provide all the food and the water and the gear as you change between biking or rafting or paddling or swimming or kayaking or building a bamboo raft or rock climbing.
And fighting the elements. And sleep was a kind of a luxury, right? You basically got to rest when you could. Yeah. It was when it was super dark or you were super tired or you just couldn't go anymore.
Unlike most every other sport I know of, there are a couple of phrases that go around in the adventure racing world, and one of them is that sleep is a strategy. Which means it may not even be a luxury. It may not even
It's a strategy.
Yeah, it's a strategy. And anything less than probably 30 hours, a 30-hour race would be what most people would just do straight through without sleeping. Certainly for Eco Challenge, you have to sleep along the course for that many days. But I think the top teams that finished that course slept a total of 20 hours in a week and a half. So
let's jump back. Let's jump back in time. You mentioned that you had broken your back. What happened? Tell me about that.
Yeah, I was a high school student. I'd spent a lot of time on the lake. My brother and my dad and I used to run slalom courses for fun. And one weekend we were riding the inner tube. And for those lake enthusiasts out there who like to ride tubes, my dad and my brother and I are all quite competitive, and we would just beat the dog out of each other. So it was something, that was an adventure race in and of itself.
Is that where it all began?
It's like a rodeo on water, basically. And
this is in Texas?
Yes, this is in Texas. Yeah, out in West Texas where I grew up. And one weekend I was on the lake. Some friends, neighbors were driving the boat, and I was riding with my cousin. And we went up into a cove and turned kind of in the shallow part of the cove, the narrower part of the cove. And as the tube slung out around the boat while it turned, we slammed into a dock.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And the doctors in the emergency room that evening, they estimated that to do the damage it did for both of us, we probably hit that dock about 60 miles an hour.
Wow.
So,
wow.
Yeah.
Were you conscious? Do you remember it all?
I remember a lot of it. I remember seeing the dock and then hitting it.
Okay.
We were just traveling that fast across the water. We both kind of hit the dock sideways across our glutes, and had a lot of bruising and fractures in our elbows or wrists. And at the time, I don't remember the impact, but I remember floating in the water and watching my legs float up because I just couldn't feel them.
Couldn't move them. Did you think that you would lose the ability to walk?
Oh, I thought immediately I was paralyzed.
Yeah.
I immediately knew this is bad news. Thank heavens. It turned out that was like a form of spinal trauma, and everything reset. And I walked out of the hospital that night.
Wow.
Yeah.
But that ended, you had told me earlier, I think you were intending to go to college and water ski on a scholarship.
Yeah. I mean, it ended a number of things. You reach a point where I think probably all of us have something that is a barrier, something that holds us back. And that for me was just one of those elements that I thought I'm going to do whatever I want to do physically as much as I can. I'm going to play. I played club soccer. I even played football on a team that called itself semi-pro back in the Dallas days. And, I've done a pretty lot of pro-am volleyball, beach volleyball, and I've done every sport that I want to do. And about every 3, 4, 5 years, that old back injury gets a hold of me. I feel it every day. I wake up every day. It's something that,
it's always with you.
That you deal with. Yeah.
Yeah.
But every now and then it kind of shuts you down. I met with a neurologist one time during one of these really bad episodes where I was considering whether or not I was going to have surgery. And I've intentionally chosen not to have surgery all these years. I encourage people, if you have any option, don't have back surgery. You'll have it again. If you have one, you'll have a second. And this neurologist told me one time, he said, "You have the spine of a 47-year-old hockey player." I was like, "I don't play hockey and I'm not 47, at the time. But yeah.
But it led you to make different choices in college, which then led you to a creative career, which is, of course, how we met, because you were a creative director, an amazing creative director. You did such great work in Dallas. And talk about that a little bit. How did you make that choice to transition into the arts? Was that something you always knew you wanted to do?
I think so, but without consciously knowing it. I knew I was very interested in doing art as a career, as a job, when I was a high school student. But I also really struggled with the idea of like trying to sell artwork on the street. I couldn't visualize what that looked like when I was younger. I felt like, oh, maybe I should be an architect. which is funny in the design industry. A lot of designers all started off as architects because it's the thing that you can visualize, and your parents and mentors can kind of see and point you toward. It's hard to point people toward like, no, you can be a graphic creative visualizer of stories and problem solving. And, it's more of a popular career now, but at the time it wasn't something that a lot of people just raised their hand and said, like, I'm going to go off to art school and be a visual communications manager,
Yeah, parents are usually like, what's that?
Exactly. Yeah.
And so you pursued that for years. And I guess if we flash forward on that transition where you said, okay, I'm ready for something different, which probably was around the time, I guess, when we had last spoken, right? Because I think you were leading some design teams in Dallas and you had made a couple of transitions. So talk about that. What led you to choosing different paths in your career?
Yeah. So I'm still a creative director. I love the craft of design. That's the thing that has held me in that current, if you will, sort of this thing that's moving always in my life. When I look back at the pictures and the things that I drew, my artwork from high school, they were ads, even though I didn't know it. That was a picture of a cool car on a beach with a volleyball net and then a headline. I didn't know what I was just drawing cool letters. I didn't put together that this is what an ad is. It's an interesting image with a headline that draws you in and tries to create some sort of actionable behavior from it, And over the years, I have always been that young designer that asked too many questions. I just have such a thirst for knowledge. I love to learn. I love to see the layers and the connections between things. I'm constantly finding metaphors and lessons learned from this aspect of life to that aspect of life. Sometimes I feel like there are panes of glass, that you can, from one layer, you can look at them and see that they're separate. Adventure racing is separate from design, is separate from a business career, is separate from a personal life. But in other layers, those things all overlap and the colors change depending on the way you look through these different experiences. And so I've gone from being, a young designer early in my career that asked too many questions because I want to know what was on the other side of that creative brief, other side of that challenge. What's the business need behind this? Why are they asking us to create these postcards or this website? Why, when they say they want a logo, why do they want a logo? Why do they want it this color or that shape? And why is a serif font the right font or a sans serif font, right? I just was always into these questions because I was really trying to use my design skills to solve the problem at hand.
Right.
And over the course of my career, I just learned, wow, there's a lot of young designers as I got older and took on more management roles, management for the team or management for a studio or a group or management for large clients, even agencies themselves. I just learned that a lot of times creatives are a bit of an anomaly sometimes. They're hard people to manage, creative people. Because they're
pretty independent minded, right? They have a vision for something they want to go do. And yet there's this no clear direction of how to get there. So how do you bring that all together?
Yeah. Well, creative people are also very intuitive people, which is they often feel the answer before they can tell you what it is, or they can feel that this direction or this solution is the right solution, but they may not have learned the communication skills to articulate that direction. So I think that's where I just found a passion personally. I love teams and I love people and I love design and I love racing and I love all of these things. And the root of it really is people. And I think that's where I just found a place to say, okay, yeah, I'm like you 20 years ago in my career. But because I'm like you and I've learned these other things, I know how to be a better ambassador, both for the work and for the client and the customer who's looking for this piece. But I also know how to be an ambassador for the designer themselves and help them get to the right solution and help this kind of, but I want the logo bigger, the age old joke. I want the logo bigger, but why? So I've just learned to kind of find value in both points of view and learn to speak both languages, if you will.
At this point in your career, you're navigating different opportunities. When did you start racing? Was that when you moved out of Texas, or was it before that?
Oh my gosh, adventure racing. This is crazy to say, but the world's toughest race was my first one.
So what?
That was our very first. None of us on Team Unbroken had ever done an adventure race before. We didn't even know it existed. We were just look at this cool thing. Let's sign up for the world's toughest race. This will be fun.
Okay, so you got to level set me here. So how did you go from, hey, I'm in Texas, I've never done this before, to, hey, let's sign up for this race, and here's how we even get approved for it? How did that even come together?
Yeah, I was in Texas. I had moved from Dallas, where we met, and we worked together at a couple of places. And I had already moved to be freelance, and I was running my own freelance design business. I moved down to Austin to be the chief design officer of a mobile tech company down there. I loved that. That was fun. I moved from there to go run a studio called Design and Manufacturing that was very much about experiential design. So it was a lot of like custom fabrication, welding, and carpentry, and projection mapping, and a lot of little nerdy stuff that I could use my hands. I really got into that company. And about a year into that, we had just finished this huge project for Game of Thrones down at South by, and Gretchen calls me and says, "Hey, I'm thinking about this race." And I said, "That looks awesome. We should get a team together and go do that." Heck yeah, I'll do that with you. And she said, "Well, we already have a team. You're on it." And I was, oh, okay. Yeah. All right. So at the time I went out at the beginning, I was the crew assistant for the team. And so I went out to go to Asheville, North Carolina, where we did a lot of our training. I went out there to do some training and just realized this is one of those opportunities in life.
You called Gretchen your sister earlier, but you don't literally mean your sister, do you?
We're not blood sister. We grew up together. She used to babysit me when I was little. We're family. But we have different parents.
Gotcha. Okay, so it wasn't like a random phone call. This was somebody you knew, trusted, and loved, and she's saying, "Hey, there's this really interesting opportunity." Now, had she ever done adventure racing before? No. And just to remind everyone, she had lost her hearing at this point, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So there you go. And is there a tryout of some sort?
You submit, because the race was going to be on Amazon. There's an interesting overlap between it being a reality show of a race. So there've been a few questions. I've been asked a number of questions about the race. How much was it a TV show, or how much of it was a race? It was 100% a race. There's no point where the show ever influenced what the race was. There were just camera people who kind of ran alongside and were staged and posed in different locations, and they basically documented the race. And they followed a few of the teams along the way. And we didn't know. No one knew whether you were going to be a featured team or not until the show came out. Really, we've kind of felt like we were, because we were asked a lot of questions for interviews and a lot of pictures of us as kids and all that kind of stuff. But you submit a video as a team. Here's who we are. Here's our racing experience. Here's what we want to go and do. And here's why the world's toughest race is the next race for us. So we submitted all of that. And for us, it was really the story. For us, it was about, just because someone is labeled as disabled doesn't mean they're incapable. So, this was something that's very dear to Gretchen, and she's very passionate about, and Keith as well, both as combat veterans, and Gretchen coming back from combat, being deaf. That's what ended her decorated military career. She's in the Veterans Hall of Fame. She's a badass, and I'm really proud of her. And she came back and felt like, wow, people are saying no to career opportunities or job opportunities or speaking opportunities or people would close the door on opportunity for her just because they couldn't understand how she was able to navigate the world. And I think that's one of the lessons learned from the adventure race is you can find a way. You can always find a way forward. And we really wanted to just put that story out there, that just because someone comes back as a combat veteran, or someone has some type of disability, doesn't mean they are incapable. It just means they're what we call creatively abled.
That's right. Creatively abled. And the show did an amazing job of spotlighting your team. And we'll get to that in a second. How did you become the team leader?
Process of elimination.
Short straw?
Yeah. Short straw. I love the team. And I just jumped in from that moment where I was, running the studio in Austin, to that first training. And I just said, man, I'm in this. I'm kind of in a transition moment for myself where I'm looking for what is the next thing. And this race is the thing I'm going to do now. What's on the other side of that, I don't know. I couldn't see that at the time, but I could see that this is what I should do. It's what I should take. This is why I put that money in savings. This is why you take those moments to get out and run and train, and people and relationships and family. And like these things suddenly became really important. It's odd to say this now post-pandemic, but those things in 2019, when we were really training, we spent 9 months together. So
full time.
I left Austin. I packed up and moved and put a bunch of stuff in storage and put a bunch of stuff in my Jeep. And I drove out to Asheville, North Carolina and lived with Gretchen and her husband, Robert. Lived in the guest room and all of our gear packed up at the garage. And we just trained full time. That was all we did. We would get up and train. I learned more about productivity living with a couple of military veterans. We got more accomplished before 9 a.m. than most people do in an entire day.
That is crazy. And what about the other teammates? Were they with you too?
Keith lived in Nebraska and Ann lived in Asheville as well. So there were 3 of us in Asheville, and Cale lived in Texas at the time.
So they were training separately. Were you directing at that point to say, okay, everyone, here's the regimen for this week. Here's what we need to be doing?
Not really. I mean, somewhat, but not really. Everyone trained individually on their own personal fitness. Can I run X number of miles? Can I ride a bike for a certain number of miles? Can I swim? Can I paddle? Everyone was already athletes and they were already in shape enough. We felt like we were in shape enough to be able to do a race like this, or at least give it a good go. What we really spent a lot of our time training on was doing it together, because we realized pretty early on that this is going to take all of us, trying to climb up, use ascenders, which is a tool that none of us had used before in climbing, or trying to rappel down a cliff with a deaf person on your team. That's a different type of challenge. You're learning how to tie knots, and you look over the person next to you and they're doing it, right or wrong, or they're having some trouble. And you have to we had to learn our own ways to communicate. And we learned a lot of that by doing it. When we were mountain biking and we were out on the trails and we were learning different techniques and technical techniques for mountain biking, and some local guy was just buzzing on the trail. That's fine. If I can hear him coming. Right. So I could move out of the way. Gretchen couldn't hear him coming. So we had to learn how to communicate with her about like, hey, watch out for that guy. Because that guy didn't know. He's going too fast. He doesn't stop. So we learned what we really trained on was, how do we communicate as a team? Who's the strongest person at rafting? Who's the strongest person at navigation? Who's the strongest runner? Who's the strongest navigator? We just sort of had different things that we tried, and then kind of picked the strongest person, the person who had the most experience, the person that the team was kind of most comfortable with. And then we just said, like, you're the leader of that discipline. And it was really, I think part of one of your questions was about me. How did I get to be the captain? Gretchen asked me to be the captain. And I was really I'm getting emotional thinking about it. I was really honored. I
Oh.
was really, really honored to be the captain of that team.
Yeah. And for anyone that hasn't watched this on Amazon Prime, it is still available, right? You can watch the race. And so not a spoiler alert in the sense that we want to reveal everything if you are going to watch it, but we have to talk about this.
Of course.
So your team was spotlighted. You were one of the teams from the very, very beginning. I think in the very opening scene, it was your team, because I said to my husband, hey, my friend Hal is on this team. And there were like 60 teams, right? I mean,
66.
66. And I was telling my son, oh, we got to watch this. We got to find my friend Hal. And then the opening scene, I'm like, oh, that's him right there.
Yeah, that one. Oh, there he is.
Yeah, there he is right there. So what did that feel like? You didn't know at the time they were going to be spotlighting you that way, right?
No. Like I said, we kind of got clues and figured out that when they asked us to interview just the day before we left for the race course, we're like, oh boy, okay, yeah, we should pay attention. It was fun. I loved it. I loved to be out there, that we had a cameraman that ran along with us. And sometimes he would have his camera on, and we would, Gretchen would say to us, no, you can't cuss when we're on camera. We're like, okay, yeah.
Okay.
So we'd have to kind of pay attention. I believe his name was Jeff, our camera guy. So we'd have to be running along. We're like, oh, okay, well, Jeff's recording. So,
Well, Jeff had to be an athlete himself to be able to hold that camera and be doing what you're doing.
All of those guys were great athletes. Yeah. Followed a number of the teams.
So let's talk about the emotional side of this, the fear. I mean, what were you feeling? I guess the first thing you have to do is paddle, right? You're in this makeshift kind of boat, and people were flipping over, and and you have to get to your first destination, and it's 66 boats taking off at the same time. It was kind of crazy to watch. Yeah. And you're beautiful Fiji, right? Beautiful sunny day, beautiful blue water. What was going through your mind in those moments?
Oh man. Fear. I've had an interesting relationship with fear, I think. I have said to a number of people, they're like, oh, what's your greatest fear? What's your thing? And then, in casual conversations at the pub and I've really sincerely and honestly said a number of times, like, I don't know. I don't really have a thing that I'm afraid of. And, fear to me is like, you open the door to a room that doesn't have the light on, because it's dark, you're afraid of what might be in there, and you fill your mind with the things that might be in there. And so fear really is a reflection of what is in you, not necessarily what is in front of you, the thing you have to do. And if anybody's familiar with the Enneagram work, I'm a classic 8, man. I am like, I'm just charging ahead. So I had 2 experiences at the beginning of the race. One, I never slowed down enough to feel fear. I never had a moment where I thought, we can't do this. And that's probably true for everybody on the team. I think that's probably true for Ann and Gretchen and Keith and Kale. We all were ready to go. We felt well prepared. We had done a lot of work. We had done a bunch of training. So we felt like we had what we needed to do to thrive. However, none of us had ever paddled a traditional Fijian thamakau, is how that's pronounced, which is that they made these boats for the race in the traditional design. So it is an outrigger canoe that has the ama, the mother, that holds the outrigger itself. And there's a name for that, but I can't remember the Fijian name for that. And it has a sail, but it's not a traditional sail on it where you can kind of tack the boat back and forth. It was a very different type of sailing craft. And we had gone out and found the one guy on the island who, none of us had experience. We all had experience sailing, we had experience paddling, but we didn't have experience on one of these things. So we had done some research, and people had told us, oh, these things tip over really easy, and you don't want to lose your stuff. And the first thing you do when you get in the boat is tie it all down and all of these things. So we kind of had all this in mind to pay attention. We had found the one guy on the island that had one of these boats. It was was similar to what we had. And we begged that guy to take us out and to give us some training on this thing. And we had gone out, and the day we went out, it was probably 3.5 foot seas, which is the height of these boats, these the canoe walls. So it was a rough day. It was a very rough day. Not all of us went out. In fact, the captain that day said, not all of you can go. Only 2 can go on the boat for this because it's very, very rough. And if it goes well, we'll come back and pick up the rest of you. So that was our plan. And we went out and the wind took us, and it was Ann and I, and we had a miserable time trying to get that thing, even with the captain on the boat trying to help us get back. And we ended up flipping the boat to get out in the middle of the ocean. So at the beginning of the race, we don't know how you're going to start the race.
Yeah.
That's a part of it. They give you the maps, they take you to the starting line, and they say, go, your thing is right down there. Your starting line is down there. And we all took off running and we ran up on the boats. That's how we found out that we started the race on these Islamic Hals. And so we had maybe not fear going into the beginning, but we had definitely had a sense of caution, of deep caution. I did not want to dump my team in the middle of the ocean, in the middle of at the very beginning of the race. We knew that would be rough to recover from. Let's just get going. And we know we're not a lead team, so we don't need to race everybody off the starting line. Let's just get going. That part turned out to be fairly wise, I thought, because the teams that did flip their boats over in the beginning were because they couldn't navigate this thing. They were just overly aggressively driving this traditional ancient craft and vessel, and sort of that's where the flips came from. A number of teams ran into each other and punctured the boats, and they took on water. And so it was a rough start to the race. What we could not plan for is that there would be no wind.
No wind.
So here we are in a sailboat with no wind. Yeah.
So it was all arms.
Yeah. I think we paddled for 14 hours.
Brute force.
Yeah.
And let me ask a question about goal setting. I know you're a thinker. I know you're a planner. Did you at any point with the team in advance set goals for the race, and what were they?
We did. Our goal was to finish the race. We knew we weren't an elite team. We knew we were newbies. We knew we were maybe in over our heads. I don't know that we would ever say it that way, but we knew we had a big task in front of us. So we were realistic about the challenges, and our goals were finish the course, stay together as a team, and come home as a team.
And so 14 hours to get to land. And if I remember, it was dark. Is that right?
Oh, yeah.
At what time of night was it?
When we got to that island, I think it was about 9:30 or so.
And were you just exhausted?
Oh, we were, absolutely exhausted. We had energy, but your body is exhausted, emotionally and spiritually. We had energy. We were singing as we were singing a little, cadence army songs along while we paddled along. We were just pooped by the time we got there. And I think that was certainly not unexpected. When we got to that island, we weren't up into the middle of the pack where we wanted to be. And I think that was sort of the first moment of like, okay, now the race is on. How
did you know where you were? Did they tell you, hey, of the 66 teams, your number, whatever it was?
No, we were just judging by the yellow sails. We could see out that perfectly flat ocean. We could see a bunch in front of us, and we didn't see a whole lot behind us. So the teams that were strong paddling teams, the New Zealanders, the Australians, the Pacific Northwesterners, and the elite teams, because they knew, okay, there's going to be they knew enough to know this is going to be in the ocean. There's going to be a lot of outrigger, and they owned these boats and they did a lot of training. So those guys, as soon as they hit the water and there was no wind, they never put their sails up. They just
crushed it.
Yeah, they just crushed it.
So what happened when you got to land and, it's 14 hours later, it's dark, it's 9:30 at night. What did you guys do? Did you say, hey, we're going to rest, or we're going to keep going?
No, we were keep going. We knew this is the plan. This is the way, as they say. We've refilled our water bottles. We drug our boat up to shore. changed our shoes, and took off.
No sleeping.
Looked at the map,
off
planned
you go.
a new course, and took off. Yeah. Yep.
So this was the hiking part, and you're in the dark, and you have to navigate. If I recall, it was pretty steep, kind of jungle environment. Would you describe it that way? Muddy jungle.
Oh yeah. It's
on a good day.
Island.
Yeah,
It's
volcanic island.
Mud. Yeah.
Yeah. In a good day, this would be a hard hike. So you had like little headlights, I think you were wearing on your foreheads.
Yeah.
And that's all you could do to see, right?
Yeah. Which was another fun challenge that we learned. When you have a person who primarily communicates by reading lips, and anyone who's ever been camping knows that like, oh, your headlights are shining me in the face, that was certainly another element that we learned. A lot of times in these adventure races, you're trying to, like I say, there's no defined race course. It's not like there's cones or signs that you're following. You don't get a chance to turn your mind off and then just body along, So a lot of times you're trying to find the fastest route between 2 points. And sometimes there will be a path there. Sometimes it'll be a road. Sometimes you're cycling on the road. Sometimes it'll be a dirt road. Sometimes it'll be a cattle trail or a river or a creek. Sometimes you have a thing you can follow. You're looking at the map and you're following a terrain feature. And other times you don't at all. And so that little volcanic island that we were going around, a section of it had a path, a section of it even had a road, and a section of it had nothing. And that was the bushwhacking jungle section.
Were you navigating, or was someone on your team navigating, or all of you?
I was navigating. Yeah.
You were navigating.
Yeah.
And there was a critical decision that needed to be made. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. Yeah. I think this is the moment that, we've become good friends with a number of the elite teams throughout, even prior to the race, because we ask them a lot of questions. We're newbies and we need help, right? We ask a bunch of questions, and we followed, and I've stayed in touch with a lot of those teams. And they have since said, oh man, we were watching this show. We thought to ourselves, no, Team Unbroken, no, and they've all said, you just didn't know better. Had you done more races, had you done more adventure races, then you would have known to make a different decision. But in that moment in time, the decision we made was, well, let's see, we can go one of two. We're at this point, and we've got to get to this point. This point is really dense, steep jungle. We'd already talked as a team about how that's something we were worried about, and we wanted to stay together, and that was going to be difficult to navigate. And we had planned all these little techniques and tricks and ropes and things that we could use to kind of navigate through this jungle. But here it was at midnight, 1 a.m., 1:30 in the morning, somewhere in there, when we first come across this, this navigation challenge. So do we want to try to take that on in the middle of the night, or is there a smarter route? Is there a smarter way to go about this challenge? And in retrospect, of course, you just head on, you just go for it. But at the time, what we discussed as a team, and it's in the show, you see this discussion happening live, as we're having the discussion. We have two routes. We can go this way, which is through the jungle now, and then on out of the jungle, continue on that difficult path and come back to the checkpoint, back to our boat where we were going to paddle some more. Or we can go the other way around, which is maybe 2 kilometers longer. It wasn't a significantly longer distance around. And if we go that route, we're on a known path for 3/4 of the way. So we're on a road or on a clearly defined path. So we could run, we could move quicker if we go this way. So as the navigator, what I was kind of saying to the team is, we can go this way and bushwhack, follow this route, or how is everyone feeling? Do you feel like maybe that's a bad idea or a bad decision, and we're worried about any of us getting injured? Or should we take this known path where we can move more quickly and make up the distance? Those 2 kilometers are nothing in a race, that is hundreds of kilometers long. And at the time, this is the tough one where I just fully own it. I just fully own the decision that ultimately may have taken us. There were a number of things that spoiler alert, we didn't win the world's toughest race. This is one of those moments, though. It is definitely a defining moment.
It really is. It really is. And to watch it unfold, I could feel the decision was a big one, right? Yeah. And you really, as the team leader, and this is a business show, right? So why are we talking about this world's toughest race eco challenge on Succession Stories? There's so many lessons learned here, and so many things in our lives, day to day, or even our business lives. We have to make tough decisions, and what factors into those decisions? Sometimes we have incomplete information. Yeah. Sometimes we have analysis paralysis. We have so much information, but we really just ultimately, it ends up being a head and a heart. And I think for you and the team, that's kind of where you were. You didn't want to put anyone at risk, right? And your goal, as you said earlier, was to finish the race. But at the same time, your goal was to make sure you came home with everybody. Yeah. And so is that what was weighing on you at this moment? Yeah, for sure. I didn't feel like, and this is probably an experience talking at the time, I didn't feel like going this extra 2 kilometers was going to be a deal breaker. I was worried about the team. I was worried about how, at the pace that we were moving, I was worried about everyone being exhausted and being dehydrated. And I was worried about our nutrition. And, it's hard to read that in your teammates in the dark. And when we chose to go the other way, we never chose to run. And so that was the moment where I realized, for me, that was the moment where I felt confirmed in my choice. Okay, we're on a road, but we as a team are not in a place that we could run and make up that distance. And so that's when I chose for us to sleep. Hey, how's everybody doing? Do we need to take a power nap? Which is one of the famous meme of me saying power nap. And what does power nap mean in that context? Like an hour? Yeah, I was thinking 20 minutes, 2 hours, somewhere in there. And we ended up doing 2 hours. I mean, we all knew. I mean, Keith and Gretchen they're soldiers. Like, to go days without sleep for them is not was never considered a challenge for them. Oh, you want me to sleep for 20 minutes and then get up and be ready to go another 100 miles? Fine, no problem. I've done that dozens of times. So we chose to sleep for 2 hours and then get up and continue our path, knowing that by the time we got to that rough part of the jungle, the sun would just be starting to come up and we could travel that section through the daylight. And, in retrospect, having a debrief with the team, this is one of the hard lessons that I learned as a leader. And I think I can look back in my own life and I can see how this overlaps with being an entrepreneur. I can see how this overlaps with being a creative director. I can see how this overlaps with running a business, with being a husband, with being a father. There's so many moments where I hear this same voice come to me, right? And I just had this very visceral, vivid moment that's, in public television for everyone else to experience with me. Right. But I think if we were to have the entire team on and it would have to be a bit of a therapy session, I think that what the team would say is, hey man, we chose to do the world's toughest race too. Trust us to take on the difficult part of this. And don't worry about if we get hurt. Like, we are also capable. We are also, it's my nature. It's my nature to take on the intuitive heart role and sort of forge it with my fortitude to move ahead. And I think that's a lesson that I had certainly learned from the team. I was worried about them. And I think in retrospect, they would have said, hey, if that's going to ding us and slow us down for the race, then let's forge ahead. Trust us to know what we signed up for. And I can, again, like I say, I can see that as an entrepreneur. I have felt those conversations from business partners. I have felt that from designers who are like, man, I got this. This is what I do, trust me to be good at this thing. And
Even as a father, I can see these moments where I'm like, gosh, I really worry about, my son or my daughter taking on this challenge. And then I realize, my son's 14 years old and he's 6'1", like he's fine. Yeah. He's not a little boy anymore.
He's not a little boy.
Yeah.
Well, if you were going to replay that decision-making, I mean, we all as leaders, I remember times when I was a CEO, we had to make some really tough decisions, kind of go, no go decisions. And I was in a situation once where I literally said to the room, I designated someone as the 10th man. I had heard about that technique from Israeli Mossad, that they designate someone to take the different opinion on purpose, whether they really truly believe it or not, but that's their job in that meeting or that at that moment to offer this, some people say the devil's advocate, but that's another way to think about it is the differing opinion. Why? Because you want to really make sure you're hearing all the different points of view. Now, I may not know all the conversations because television wasn't showing everything. Now, and I know you, right, personally, and so I know the kind of leader you are and what a big decision this was, but was it all on your shoulders or were people weighing in to say, no, we want to keep going? And then you said, what was that dynamic like? Did you have a 10th man in the room? You know what I mean?
There was not a 10th man. It may have been because there were only 4 of us, I also think this is just a part of the challenge of these races. You're sleep deprived, you're exhausted, you're kind of beyond your wits already. Everyone is on the team. And so, what you see is what happened on the show where I am looking at the map and I explained these 2 options and everyone on the team sort of looks at me, and so there's that moment of like, well, okay, that's my answer. As a leader, as an 8, as a like forge ahead person, like, okay, well, and maybe I didn't pause long enough for everyone to go like, wait, what are you talking about? Are you talking about going backwards? Like maybe there was this, I can second guess those conversations that never happened. But I think that's also one of the things that we've talked about is that sometimes when you're not the person who's quote in charge, it is your role to be this 10th man. It is your role to raise your hand and say, I have a strong opinion about this direction or this decision that needs to be made, even when it's not your decision to make. I think that's one of the business lessons that I see as a parallel here is that as leaders, we often don't know you're sinking because you're so focused on the future that you don't realize the water is slowly creeping up. And then you really do need your teammates around you. You need your partners to say, hey, hold on a minute. We need to solve this problem, and then we'll get to that big problem. It takes both of you. You got to both be in connection with one another. And that's true in, I don't know, every aspect of life. And
there really is true. It is. Yeah. So the next part of the show got even harder.
Yeah.
Because now at this point, you've slept a little bit and now you wake up and you're realizing, because we should explain probably to everybody, there's a time clock where you have to make it to the checkpoint by a certain time, right? That's how the race works. And so if you don't make it to the checkpoint, you're out.
Yeah.
So where were you guys in relation to that next checkpoint?
We were still on the island and not the main island, where most of the race was on the main island. They started by paddling us out to the small island and then back to the mainland. We collected the ocean medallion. We paddled that morning. We paddled to the ocean medallion. The overnight was a tropical storm that came through and just flooded the mainland, put some other teams in actual life risk danger. They shut the race course down on the mainland. That was eventually communicated to us out on the island that the race course is shut down for safety and that it'll resume the race. Everyone can continue to move at a certain time. And that changed a couple of times, trying to read the weather and keep teams as safe as possible. And I commend the eco team for doing that. It must have been an impossibly difficult decision for them to stop the race. But it was the right decision to make. They definitely took care of the racers. in that moment. So we got up, once the race started, we got on our boat, we went for the ocean medallion. We were, paddling our hearts out to get back to the mainland. We looked at the clock for ourselves, and we calculated, okay, we've got 14 hours. I think we had 15 hours when we first started the conversation. We have 15 hours to get to the checkpoint. And again, you don't know what's next. Our maps only got us back to the mainland. The first you never get a set of maps to cover the entire thing. Another great metaphor for life and business.
That's true.
Right?
That's right.
If you had a map to cover the whole thing, it would be a whole lot easier. So you get a set of maps to get you through for the first stage, the first round of funding. And then you end up on the mainland, and we had kind of calculated, okay, we have 15 hours, and we felt okay about that. We felt this is going to be tough, but we got this. The wind picked back up that next morning. It was a beautiful blue sky. We got to use our sail. We were just buzzing across there. We got to the mainland to pick up our next set of maps, and the race director flew in on chopper to tell us your race is over. And I said to Kevin Hodder, was the director of the race, and I said to Kevin, but we still have 14 hours or whatever was left at that time. And he said, you won't make it. And I was like, but we could try. And he just put his arm around me and said, you won't make it. And we learned later that the next leg was a paddleboarding leg up a river. Yeah. So against the current. And that would have taken, there were teams that did that section of the race in 11 hours. Just that paddleboarding section upriver. Yeah. And then after that was a mountain bike leg that took you to the first transition area where the time cutoff was. And Kevin himself told us it took him nearly 7 hours to do that mountain bike section. So mathematically speaking, we didn't know it, but we were out of the race long before we hit that point.
Yeah. What did the team say when Kevin came and said that news? What did you feel? What did everybody feel at that time?
No, devastated.
Yeah.
Just devastated. We had a lot of fight left in us. Yeah. To go through challenges like that are hard. They are hard. But from my point of view, that's nothing compared to the challenges that Gretchen and Keith had been through in their lives before. And so we all knew how to draw more energy from ourselves and move forward. And that's what we had done. And that's what we were ready to move on. And then to sort of have it removed from you is just, it's devastating. And we certainly felt a lot of family and camaraderie as a team. But yeah, it's definitely hard. Then all the human emotions set in, right? You kind of go through all the stages of grief.
Were people angry at you? Did you feel that they were blaming you for anything?
Not at the time. I don't think people at the time, nobody was angry at me. I think later on, I think it's only natural that I was angry, right? I was angry and frustrated. And I think it's natural that the people on the team kind of struggled, and we're angry that we didn't get as far as we did. And maybe they're frustrated that I didn't make the right decision here, or that we as a team didn't make the right decision there, or you can go back and second guess all the things. And that's part of the fun of it. And in my opinion, that's a part of it is like, that's why you do. Now I'm hooked on adventure racing. And I've done 4 or 5 races since then. I've placed and won a few trophies on a couple of them. I'm hooked in adventure racing now. Yeah.
So at the time it was so many unknowns and just first time in an incredible way that the team had come together. And then here you are, and you didn't get to accomplish it, but yet it gave you so much more. It gave you some different perspectives you never would have had otherwise that you've taken with you, obviously, in racing. And how I call it back to the civilian life. I don't know if that's the right way to say it, but, after the race, after this kind of, I don't know if it's fame or, people recognize you from the show. And here you are back in your everyday world, back in the business, being creative. What do you take with you from the race in your everyday life?
A lot of things. A whole lot of things. We might have to do a whole second episode. I think there are. I'll give you a couple. One of the things that I I have worked on and had some professional help along the way is learning how to debrief my own choices, right? And look back at my own actions and to be, I'm good at being really critical of myself. I'm naturally good at that. But to be honest about that critique, self-critique, with the intention of applying it as a sort of a sharpening stone for the future. And that's where you start to see all of these things that overlap. Adventure racing becomes a crucible, if you will, a refining moment where you just are provided with such clarity about who you are as an individual because you're forced to. Any race, any challenge like that is beyond your wits. It's beyond your natural abilities, and so you have to draw from your deeper self, if you will. And so there are a lot of lessons that come out of that experience that apply to things. And I think there are other experiences like this. Other adventure racing is one of them. There are lots of experiences that do this and give us this effect. The number one thing I would say is that I encourage everybody, be looking for those moments. And when they come to you, take them, because it might seem a little crazy. It might not, you might not know how to explain it to your business partners, or you might, but you know, in your depths, this is the right thing to do. Do it. You'll always be grateful that you took it, even if you didn't win. I think another one is that this idea of a disability was kind of brought into, my mother was brought into a new light. My mom was a speech pathologist and a director of special education. So I've spent a lot of my life around people with disabilities. And being a creative person, I probably have a number of my own disabilities. But I think this experience with Gretchen and Keith certainly brought a new light to it for me. And one of the things that brought to me was even the term disability is a term made up by the ables, like that someone else made that term up and put that label on people that were different than themselves. And it's unfortunate because it's not a disability. It just means that person has the opportunity to have this creative ability to do a thing. And when you're able to see it in a new light like that, then at least for myself, I thrive going to those people who have different perspectives and different opportunities. And as a designer, I want to be around people who see the world totally different than I do, because that helps me make the connections that I may not have had otherwise. As a business person, it makes me want to embrace the others. And it makes me want to go diversity is sure, it's one way to say it, but really it's about someone other than yourself. Of course that has to do with race. Of course that has to do with gender. Of course that has to do with a number of labels. But the point is, go find someone other than yourself and empower them, because you'll always be surprised at how capable they are, at how their point of view brings so much light to what the two of you could accomplish together, that it sometimes makes it so much more fun. Gretchen and the team and I laughed. We laughed so many times over silly stuff that we had to figure out. Gretchen's up on the, climbing a cliff, and she's kind of in between Keith and I on the rock. Keith's at the top and I'm at the bottom, and Gretchen's in the middle just laughing herself silly because she's stuck, and we were yelling at her and she doesn't even know it. We've had so many moments like that where life is so much more full because we had these other experiences. It's just, there's lessons in navigation, there's lessons in road mapping, there's lessons.
Feeling like you've got a TED Talk in your future. I don't know.
It'd be fun.
You really have learned so many things. I can just tell, and I know how you prepared for today, and really were very thoughtful about what we were going to talk about, right? And I know that there's still so much to learn from going through these experiences. You shared that you now race with your son.
Yeah. I took my son on his first race. We did a 24-hour race together. He was 13 at the time that we did it, and 6 feet tall. He wasn't a tiny little guy. He was the youngest person at that race to complete all 24 hours. And often in adventure racing, you sometimes find yourself on the course alongside another team or two. And adventure racers know, unless you're at the elite, you're at the top, you're the first, second, or third person, team. You're not racing another team. You're racing the clock. You're racing yourself. You're racing the course. You're racing your decision-making ability. You're racing other things, not other people. So you often find yourself alongside other teams, and it's kind of fun sometimes to be able to chat and have conversation. Well, I'm racing along. My son's named Colt, and we're racing along together. And all the adults from 3 separate teams are just exhausted in the middle of the night. We're off our bikes and we're just pushing our bikes up this long, steep gravel climb. And here comes Colt riding down the road on his bike. And he pulls up next to me and he quietly says, like, "You okay, Dad?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'm okay, bud. How you doing?" He was like, "I'm good." And I'm like, "Yeah. You don't have to stay with us. You can, just stay with the group, stay so you can stay where you can see them." Okay. And he pops a wheelie and just like rides off.
Off he goes.
Yeah. And off he goes.
That's the 13, 16-year-old body.
That's right.
With no back injury.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Yeah. He loves it. He's really excited about, like learning all the different pieces of it, the different skills from navigating and stuff. It's what a cool experience to be able to give that deeper gift of sort of self reflection and confidence that I can do this beyond crazy, difficult thing that I can't even really define at the beginning because there's no definition of the thing. To be able to give that gift to your kids.
That's amazing.
Awesome.
That's amazing. And I'm super impressed with that challenge that you took on to say, "Hey, I'm going to do this. I'm going to train for it. I'm going to dedicate 9+ months, train, work with a team, go to Fiji, try to figure this out." And, and even just the takeaways and the lessons learned, I can tell it'll always be with you. You'll always keep learning from it. And now you're kind of applying it to what's next in your life. And the fear that we talked about early on, I mean, I'm kind of a wimp. I can't say I'm afraid of heights, but it's not like I'm going to go jump out of an airplane, and just take on all this sort of physical risk. So when I see people doing it that are kind of like me, right? Like you are just like any one of us, right? You weren't this elite athlete. You sort of learned how to do it. And my husband has some tendencies where he'll do some crazy sports thing and he's like, "Let's just do it." So some people have that go just do it mentality, and how you apply that in life and business, in your physical challenges, I think is a good message and a good takeaway. I love to ask everyone who comes on the show if they have a favorite quote to share. And it's typically about entrepreneurship or leadership. And I have a suspicion that you have a few up your sleeve. Am I right?
Yeah. Yeah. And they're about all the things. Favorite quote. I'm going to give you two. I'm going to give you two favorite quotes that overlap all of these things we've talked about: family and business and design. And of course, they're rooted in adventure racing. Really, the first one is, the clock is the only thing you're really up against. Everything else is navigable. Lesson learned from just life. You get older, you look back, boy, where did the time go? Where did this white beard come from? Man, kids are so tall. And you look back in businesses sometimes and think, oh my gosh, boy, it's been how many quarters? And you chart things in growth or challenges or opportunities. But, sometimes adventure racing is a great example. Eco Challenge was the perfect example of this. The clock is really what you're up against. All the other things, how you paddle, when you paddle, who you paddle with, what training you do, how prepared you are, all of that, the choices you make. Do you go? Do you not go? Do you eat? Do you don't eat? Do you invest here? Do you invest over there? Like really the navigation of all that stuff is really the fun of life. That's where the smiles and the stories and the heartache, and that's the joy. It's where it all comes from. The clock is the thing out there that's the one uncontrollable thing that you're up against.
Yeah. What's your second one?
Yeah. The second one is, man, this is just a hard lesson learned right here. Don't pack your fears. Don't pack your fear. You tend to, in anything really, but the example in adventure racing is you think to yourself, boy, when I get out on course, I might come across a stream and my shoes might get wet. So maybe I should pack an extra pair of shoes, or I should pack an extra pair of socks, or someone might get injured. So I might want to pack an extra first aid kit, or, boy, if it's really dark, I don't like the dark. So I don't want my headlight to go out. So I'm going to pack extra batteries, and I don't know if my headlight's waterproof. So I'll pack an extra headlight just in case that one's goes out. You go on and on and on and on and on before you know it, you've got a pack with 70 pounds in it full of stuff that you will never use and totally don't need. And the first time you cross that stream, you think to yourself, well, I almost cussed. First time you cross the stream, you think to yourself, well, that stinks. I'm just going to go on with wet feet. You just learn to keep going. You can't plan for every situation out there,
No, you can't.
Yeah.
So don't pack your fears. So we've talked about so much today, Hal. I really appreciate you coming on the show, and it's been so great to reunite with you. And I'm so appreciative of you being so authentic and sharing your story. So thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you, Laurie. It's been awesome to catch up again after all the time. I'm so stoked that you still have little Jerome Bettis and the nesting dolls over there. Yeah, this has been fun. This has been good. Yeah.
It's really good. All right. Well, thanks again, Hal.
Thanks, Laurie.
Innovation, transition, growth. Easy to say, but hard to do. If you're an entrepreneur facing these challenges, I get it. I work with businesses from small to big to achieve your vision. Visit SmallDotBig.com to learn more. I'd love to connect with you. Subscribe to Succession Stories, and if you enjoy the show, please share a rating and review. Thanks for listening.